Hey everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and today I'm going to show you guys a little something that I hope will be interesting about an opening I know almost nothing about. But I've played it, well, I played on the white side of it, not the black side. In fact, here's a little story. So I'm talking about the Dutch, so I should clarify that right away. So I'm going to show an old game where I won very quickly against the Dutch with a certain idea, and essentially I want to talk about that idea and how it can work, how black ought to meet it, that kind of thing. So about the Dutch, when I was young, I mean really young, like junior high school, maybe 10 years old, 11 years old, something like that. There was this friend of mine, good friend. We played all the time, constantly, and our two shortest losses in casual games to each other, I think, he lost once to me in the Nimzo Indian, so I was white, and on move 4 I played A3, so I played a samish. He played bishop to A5, I played B4, and he resigned. And as far as I recall, he never played the Nimzo Indian again. On the other hand, my shortest loss to him was in a Dutch, and somehow within 10 moves I was getting mated on the H5 E8 diagonal. And after that, I never played the Dutch again. So I think I got the better out of both parts of that deal. So I was spared a life playing this, I think, somewhat dubious opening, and he stopped playing a really good opening and went to other things. Anyway, it's not as bad as all that, I suppose, but I've always had a little bit of a dubious attitude towards the Dutch. But I have to admit, I mean, some really fantastic players have used it. I mean, Botvinnik most famously for many years. Bronstein used it. Yusupov uses it, or at least did use it. Kramnik early in his career, even Kramnik, I mean, of all people, played it, and the Stonewall in particular, and lots more. So, I mean, objectively, I'm not sure if it's 100% correct, but it's certainly a real opening. I play things that are worse than the Dutch, or at least that aren't better than the Dutch. Anyway, this first game was played back in 1986, so I was white, and my opponent was Monokroussos. And another funny story, I mean, I did play D4 fairly regularly back then, but Monokroussos was a correspondence player who had actually written a small book on the Latvian gambit. And to my shame, I have to say that I thought, well, this guy's written a book on the Latvian. I better not try going into that against him. Now, of course, I would happily play, face the Latvian against anybody. I mean, even if it's Magnus Carlsen, I mean, he's Magnus Carlsen, but come on, it's the Latvian gambit. So, all right, I chickened out back then. I decided to play D4, which, as I said, was pretty common for me in those days. But, okay, it worked out. Anyway, let's see what happened. So this was from a short match, and by transposition, he goes into a Stonewall Dutch. And nowadays, the usual move here is to play C6. Maybe it was then, too, I don't know, but he played bishop to E7. The point is that, all right, one of White's standard ideas is, okay, let's take a look at the game, although I didn't actually do it. Castles, B3, C6. And then to play bishop to A3 to swap off the dark squared bishops. And the reason for this is quite simple, although I don't know if I really appreciated it at the time, even though I was 2371 back then. Still, you learn things. So, I mean, I'm sure things I did better back then than I do now, and there's much that I know now that I didn't know then. At any rate, because Black has set up his pawns in the famous Stonewall formation, like this, he's of course weakening the dark squares. So these two squares in particular are nice outposts for me, potentially F4 as well. So White wants to maximize his play on these dark squares. And to do that, it's often a very good idea to exchange off the opponent's defenders of those squares. So that's a point I've made to you guys many, many times. Unfortunately, I wasn't watching those videos back then, let alone recording them. So, I think I maybe didn't fully appreciate the value of this. So I had a different idea in mind, and it worked really well in this game. But anyway, this is one of the basic plans. So to thwart this, going back here, Black will often play bishop to D6. But if you play bishop to D6 right away, you have to beware. White can sometimes just play C5. All right, it's not the main move here, but this kind of idea does arise. Also, White can sometimes play bishop to F4, and this can be convenient too. Black doesn't want to play bishop back to E7, And this exchange is interesting, but it's not necessarily bad for white. So their idea is like this. So by putting the bishop on f4 straight away, on d6 straight away, it gives white some extra options. So that's why c6 is the main move. And then after castles, then bishop to d6. Okay, now if bishop to f4, first of all, white's committed to castling. So maybe it's slightly less appealing to play bishop f4 here, although it's still a very common and playable move. The second thing is that now on b3, black can play queen to e7 and delay white from playing bishop to a3. So here, white sometimes plays either bishop to b2 and then queen c1 and then bishop to a3, or alternatively we'll play the immediate a4, aiming for bishop to a3. But this kind of weakens some squares too, like b4 now becomes a slightly weak square on white's side of the board. So if you play the Stonewall, I mean, this would be at least the normal way to go. I'm not saying this is best. It probably is best, but it's certainly very normal. Okay, there are other Stonewall plans for black too, by the way. I mean, black will sometimes play, instead of queen to e7, setups involving the pawn going to b6, bishop to b7, and so on. Although I think that can still happen after queen e7. a4, okay, well here black generally plays a5, but b6 can be played here too. Bishop a3, and let's say takes, knight takes, just castle, and again, inevitably bishop to b7 will take place. And the idea is to play sooner or later for c5, and then it's not really clear at all whether black, in fact, is saddled with a bad bishop. Then the only question is whether the e5 square is really a serious issue thanks to the f7, f5 pawn push. But black has done reasonably well in these variations. Okay, well anyway, back to the game. So he played bishop e7, castles, b3, c6, and I played bishop to b2. And I had a very simple plan that I had devised. I don't think I had gotten this from any book. And it worked in this game to absolute perfection. All right, well here, Gravenus played knight to e4. Other alternatives, so there are two other standard plans. One's to play bishop to d7 with the idea of swinging the bad bishop around to h5 and potentially even exchanging it. And the second idea is the big kingside build-up with queen e8, followed, of course, by queen h5 and trying to stir up some trouble. And there, this used to be a very common way for black to play. It's less popular now. One reason why is that one of white standard ideas is to maneuver a knight to f4, and of course that'll walk right into it. Now black can play g5, but anyway, that has its pluses and minuses too. Anyway, this is kind of an old-fashioned plan, and we'll actually see, I think, queen e8 in the next game. All right. Anyway, Gravenus played knight to e4, and here I made a move that was a novelty. I think it's been played once since then in a relatively low-level game. And then black's move diverged from that game anyway. The usual move here is knight b to d2, and knight to e5 is also played. And knight e5 is pretty similar to what I did. And just to give one example, knight to d7, knight to d3, queen e8, f3, knight d6, knight to d2, b6, rook c1, bishop b7, and then here white played e3. And okay, I mean, I think I like white a little bit better here, but it's certainly playable for black. So again, as I said, knight b to d2 is the other normal move. But I played knight to e1, which is like knight e5, but perhaps not quite as accurate. Anyway, bishop to f6, f3, knight to d6, and here I made a slight inaccuracy, but actually a very important one. Perhaps here I should play the move c5. And after knight f7, knight to d3, although I think with b6, probably black can maintain equality. In the game, I played knight to d2, and here's another important lesson for you guys. So you may have an idea that, okay, in a certain opening, you do such and such. You do X, Y, and Z. And often what will happen is that even when your opponent deviates from what he normally does, from his script, so to speak, there will always be kind of a natural inclination to just continue as if he had more or less done the same thing. So if your plan normally involves doing A, B, and C, well, even if your opponent did something different, you still end up doing A, B, and C. And that's what my opponent did. So he just developed kind of routinely with knight to d7. I played knight to d3, and he played queen to e8. And after this, he gets crushed. But if he had been a little bit more flexible in his thinking, I think he would have very easily found two better moves. I mean, he was a good player. He was a master at some points. I think he was a high expert at this time. I have he was 2170 at the time of this game. But he was a long-time master, strong correspondence player, and certainly strong enough to find two better moves. So you might want to try to figure them out for yourself. Okay, well, one is just c5, taking advantage of the pin on the diagonal. And this, I think, is good for equality. And an even better move, though, is, and this is a crucially important Dutch idea, f4. This move, I think, makes black even a little bit better in the position. So this prevents my plan altogether, and it shuts in my bishop on g2. So this is really a key idea. It's also giving it's a clearance move, giving the black knight the f5 square, and of course from there, I mean, it's hitting all kinds of juicy targets in my position. So this would not have made me a happy camper to see this move. I mean, of course, I probably played g4 here, but my poor bishop on g2. I mean, that's painful. So I don't know. I really don't want to play g4 here, but I'm loath to allow knight f5 as well. Anyway, that would have been uncomfortable. But he played knight to d7, as I said, knight to d3, and again, okay, now I've stopped knight f4. But sorry, I mean I've stopped him from playing f4 thanks to my knight. But he should play, and he still can play something like this: bc, bc, and then c5. Again, putting some pressure on my pawn structure before I can execute my plan. So this would have more or less forced e3, and then the position, I think, is about equal. I mean, it's an interesting game from here. But he played queen to e8, and now he just gets rolled over in a real hurry. So we'll see the power of this simple plan that I chose. So it's interesting. I mean, rather than fighting for the dark squares, my idea was to just fight for the light squares. So I prevent, it's like I'm outdoing black. I mean, black has made all these Stonewall moves: c6, d5, e6, f5, put a knight on f6, now on d6, and so on. But I win the battle, so I play e4. And now black is in some trouble here. All right, he played fe, I retook. Here, maybe he should play bishop to g5, and this would at least keep him kind of in the game, although white's definitely better. But he took. Yeah, by the way, kind of a curiosity. So from here, I make 7 straight captures, which I think is my longest capture sequence in a tournament game at any rate. So knight e4, de4, bishop e4, and here white is clearly better. Black has real problems. He's got a bad pawn structure too, less space, less development. So to take advantage, or to try to catch up in development and to eliminate his pawn structure problem, he plays e5. But now it's just death. Okay, I take this pawn and I'm winning. If he doesn't recapture, I'm up a great pawn for nothing. He does capture, and now I just keep collecting. Takes, I take on f8, I take on e5, and then it's not a capture, but it's a winning check. Whatever he does, queen e8 or king f7, rook to f1, is winning colossal amounts of material. So he resigned here. All right, so that was how how this game finished. Very simple plan, very direct, worked like gangbusters. But as we'll see, this e4 idea, while interesting, is no guarantee of success. All right, so let's have a look now at a game played by some bigger boys. Salo Floor had white, Mikhail Botvinnik had black. This is from a 12-game match they played in 1933 that wound up drawn. So Floor, who was a more experienced, better-known player at that time, was the favorite and got off to a 2-point lead, but Botvinnik won, I think, games 9 and 10. This is game 10, and caught him to draw the match eventually 6-6. So since Botvinnik won, let's flip it around and see things from his point of view. And all right, so again, it's a bishop to e7 line. Now, knight to c3. I mean, this is not a move I'm overwhelmingly fond of. Again, I think knight f3 is a better choice. And this knight, I mean, you'll have, certainly against the Stonewall, you'll have this kind of classic knight maneuver where this knight goes to d3, In my game it went via e1, but probably e5 most of the time is a bit better. And then this guy comes to f3. All right, so that's more usual. So the knight on c3, for it to get to a meaningful square where it's outposted on a dark square, and it's going to take longer, and it'll require playing e3. So you can go knight c3 to e2 to f4. And then the question becomes, well, is e3 a useful move? And I'm inclined to think most of the time it's not, because it's weakening f3, for instance, and depending on what's going on with this bishop, it might be blocking that guy as well. So I think knight f3 is better. It's also more flexible. I mean, you're most of the time going to play knight f3 anyway, and whether the knight's best on c3 or not remains to be seen. On the other hand, sometimes in Stonewalls you'd like to put the knight on h3, but still, it's rare that the knight goes to c3. So I think this is just an evolution that wasn't really known at the time. So knight to c3 was played by Floor, and now Botvinnik played d5. And since Floor didn't play knight h3 anyway, I think this makes a good case for knight f3, the move before. Okay, c6, castles, castles, b3, and queen e8. So here we go with the big build-up. Bishop to b2, knight b to d7. And here, I think white should go for the plan that I mentioned with e3, especially with black having played queen to e8. So e3, queen h5, knight e2, aiming to play knight f4, asking the queen what exactly she's doing over there. So black really is committed to playing g5. And now, this has occurred in games over many generations. I mean, it's a reasonably well-known position. And here, white has, I think, at least two pretty plausible ways to continue. So one is knight to c1, which I think would be my preference, probably. The idea of playing knight to d3 and then putting one knight or the other, maybe eventually both, though not simultaneously, on the e5 square. And also, by putting the knight on d3, if black ever plays g4, well, the knight's ready to jump into f4. So that's the other point. Alternatively, white can just play knight to e5 straight away, and this isn't bad either. And black doesn't really want to take on e5, as that's going to free up the d4 square for white pieces. Anyway, knight c1 would be my choice here. But Floor, like the young me, wanted to go for a plan involving e4. So rather than going for this dark square domination, he goes for he tries to outdo black on the light squares. Queen h5. Again, e3 would be a safer, saner approach, but Floor played cd, ed, and again knight e3, but knight to d2. And so now it's clear he's ready to play f3 and e4 almost no matter what, and hoping that his lead in development will make the difference. So, he'll end up with an isolated d-pawn, which wasn't the case in my game, but with the lead in development, with active pieces, with black's queenside just sitting at home, he's hoping. So anyway, what should black do? So black now knows what white is up to. How should he react to this? So this is a good moment for you guys to improve your strategic vision of the game. What's the right way to go for black? Well, it's not f4 yet. If you play f4 at this point, white can probably ignore it. Not necessarily by playing e3 or e4, but I mean, I'm ignoring the pawn in the sense of not capturing it. But instead, Botvinnik played knight to e4. Okay, white played f3, takes, and now that white is committed to f3, now f4. So we stop e4, and we freeze this bishop on g2 as a piece of junk. This guy is awful now, and he's awful whether black plays g4, g takes f4, or does absolutely nothing. It's stuck there. So white really needs to find some way of kind of fighting here, and not just sitting around and waiting to get killed. So I think e4, as crazy as this might seem, is probably the best move. So e4, and now I think black should play queen to g6. So pinning over here, and believe it or not, this has the idea of using the d5 square. So black threatens to take on g3, and after g4, knight f6, and now the threat is to take on e4. All right, so for instance, if rook a to e1, d takes e4, and white can't recapture with the pawn because the g4 pawn would drop. So knight e4, and then knight to d5. And black has a huge advantage, much better structure. Both of white's bishops are bad. D5 is a great square. E3 might turn out to be an even better square. So this is a disaster for white. Strategically lost there. But even if he plays h3, so that way on d takes e4 he can play f takes e4. Well, the bad news is that black will still play knight to d5, and again with a pretty nice advantage. But this at least is white's best try. I mean, he's not in desperate trouble yet. So he's worse, but it's still a game. All right, in the game, white played rook f to e1. Again, perhaps hoping to prepare the e4 advance, but it never happens. So bishop to d6, threatening, of course, on g3. And white really doesn't want to play g4 because, again, that's suicide for his bishop. Knight f1. Well, now black, I think, was a little bit inaccurate. He should have played knight to f6. And then if g4, you don't want to play g4, but at some point you have to stop the black pieces from setting up shop. I mean, and black probably will play either bishop to f5 or maybe even bishop h3 just to swap off a defender at some point. Anyway, g4, queen h4, and here if e3, this loses to knight g4 and f3. So I think knight f6, just bringing the remaining pieces into the action as fast as possible, was best. Instead he played rook to f7, and here I think g4, as unappealing as this is probably best because after queen h4, e3, white is able to take advantage of the fact that the black queen side is still undeveloped. So this maybe gives him some chances to hold on, to open up the board a little bit while he's got the better developed pieces. So instead, though, white played e3, and now black takes on g3. Now, this at first glance looks really, really good for white. You might think, well, gosh, you can just play h takes g3. Now white's kingside pawn structure is very clean. There's no weaknesses there, and he can maybe start to kind of crawl out of this mess. But the problem is rook takes f3, and this exchange sacrifice gives black fantastic play. After bishop f3, queen f3, I mean, you can see, first of all, that white has just all kinds of holes over here. The g3 pawn is weak. This bishop on c3 is kind of sickly. And, I mean, these pawns on e3 and d4 don't help the bishop at all. And black has a big advantage at this point. So floor played knight takes g3. That was the floor plan. Ha ha ha. White played queen to h4, black played queen to h4, and now white was forced to retreat to f1. Okay, well, at least this avoids the exchange sack line, but still, after knight to f6, black is clearly better. Again, white would love to play e4, but he can't do it. If he plays e4, he just loses. Takes, knight g4, hitting h2, and after h3, knight f2, with a double attack on the queen, and the h3 pawn, which is just going to drop off. And I mean, you can see white just doesn't have enough defenders around his king. I mean, black's got the queen, the knight, both bishops, and a rook. And once bishop takes h3 happens, or if it does happen, then this rook is also ready to come into the action. So you've got all six pieces that are either participating right away. Well, five are participating immediately, and one will very quickly join the action if necessary. So there's just no hope here. So floor played rook to e2. And here Botvinnik should have played, I think, knight h5. Maybe Botvinnik underestimated slightly, or maybe missed, although I doubt that, but maybe he underestimated Floor's idea. So I think knight h5 is better to stop it. In the game, Botvinnik played bishop to d7, just developing, and now bishop to e1, followed by bishop to g3. And again, I think Floor is maybe a bit more in the game now than he deserves to be, if black had played correctly. So bishop takes, and here I think Floor should have played h takes g3. Maybe he didn't want to do it because of this. I mean, it's still a problematic position. Knight h5, Okay, he can't defend with king h2 because of knight g3. Knight g3, queen h4. Black wins a pawn and continues to have a superlative position. And king to f2 is dangerous because of, well, I mean, it's just walking into trouble in the f-file, but maybe it could be played. Anyway, g4 might be best. But now black plays knight to knight f6, and we'll continue with h5. And white is still in trouble, but black can keep resisting. You can play knight h2, for instance, and still fight. In the game, Floor played knight takes g3. And now, after Botvinnik's next move, white is on death's door. So what should black do here? I mean, Floor's position is almost starting to look reasonable. Not good, but reasonable. Well, the answer is h5. And he's just going to keep going. h4, h3, game over. So white is forced to play the really positionally disgusting f4, and then after queen to g4, rook f2. And the idea is that after h4, white has a defense. So what's that defense? What should white do here? I mean, he's in trouble. He's not going to be equal no matter what. But he at least has a couple of interesting ideas. One is pretty good, relatively good. The other one is not very good. All right, the not very good idea was chosen in the game. The good idea was h3. So a neat little trick here. The point being that queen takes g3, rook f3 traps the black queen, and all right, white's position is bad enough that black is still equal if he just takes and takes this. I mean, it's a rook knight and a pawn for the queen, and you know, the e3 pawn is weak. White has some light square problems, but probably it's about equal here. But after h3, black would play instead queen to e6 and just keep the positional trumps that he's got. But at least the g-file problems are gone, so white doesn't have to worry about that. And after knight f1, rook e8, black has a big advantage, but you know, he still has to land a finishing blow before the game is over. After the choice that Floor made, the game ended pretty quickly. So Floor played bishop to f3. And now the question is where the black queen should go. So figure that out. Alright, tricked you. The queen should not go anywhere. H takes g3, and this wins. After takes, and knight g4, it's just over. Black has a rook and two minor pieces for the queen, and the queen is completely ineffectual here. Black is going to put rook on the e-file, play bishop f5, bishop e4, stuff like this, and you know, it's completely busted for white. So he played h3 to grab the pawn, knight e4 check, and here Floor resigned. I mean, what can he do? So we've already mentioned the difficult material situation, and he can't save the pawn on h3, because if he goes to g2, bishop h3 anyway, since king h3, knight f2 would bag the queen. But, you know, regardless of whether he defends that pawn or not, I mean, the material balance is just hugely in black's favor, and it's a position where the white queen is completely ineffective. I mean, there are no targets in the black position. There aren't any loose pieces, loose pawns, passed pawns. I mean, none of the things that can make a queen work really well are present. So Floor correctly gave up the battle here. All right, so in sum then, this anti-Stonewall plan with f3 and e4 is interesting, and it's not that it can never work. I mean, you saw it worked in my earlier game against a very good player, you know, a good and experienced player, but against a sufficiently strong player or one who is, you know, let's say sufficiently astute and recognizes what's going on, I think the plan can be neutralized. So be aware of it. You know, you might try it out sometime if you face a lot of Stonewall guys, but don't put all your eggs in that basket. And of course, you Stonewallers, you know, now you're aware of this trick, this idea, and of course that the main, or one of the main ideas by way of trying to thwart such plans is to meet f3, or to be ready to meet f3 with f4 yourself. All right, so that'll do it. Hope you enjoyed the games, and especially for those of you who play either side of this system, I hope you were able to benefit from that from the theoretical aspect of it as well. All right, see you next week. Bye-bye.